Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Geography Podcast. This is a mini episode. Thank God I've been on the road all week. I'm Rabbi Eitan, your host, and so I haven't really had time to put together a full podcast, but I did want to come and talk to you guys a little bit about the Parsha this week. The Parsha is Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah, Abraham's wife, which ironically, given the name of the Parsha, actually begins with Sarah's death. It says, Sarah's lifetime, the span of Sarah's life, came to 127 years. Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, now Hebron. This happens a lot in the Bible, especially in Bereshit, that is Genesis, the book of Genesis, where we have towns that have multiple names. Hebron is Kiryat Arba, Bethlehem, which is Ephrat, Bethlehem, which is Ephrat. That's one example. So Kiryat Arba is another name for Hebron. Today, it's the name of the closest Jewish settlement just at the edge of Hebron. Continuing with the verse, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham proceeded to mourn for Sarah and to bewail her. Then Abraham rose from beside his dead. He rose, meaning he stood up. He had been sitting. That's where we get the idea of Shiva, of sitting for the mourning period, and spoke to the Hittites, saying, I am a resident alien among you. Sell me a burial site among you, that I may remove my dead for burial. So something you have to understand here, to understand what Abraham is getting at, is that he says he's asking that they sell him a burial place for his dead. He's not asking to simply use a burial place. And to understand this, you have to understand the way people, including Jews, were buried during this time period. Essentially, if you had the money for it, your family would have a cave. And at the end of the cave, you would have the head of the household sort of laid out, probably the patriarch who bought the place, would be laid out on a bench. And there would be two benches on the walls, making a sort of a horseshoe shape. And then the father would be laid out on that bench at the end, and there was a receptacle underneath the bench at the end. And the two benches on the side, anytime anyone in the family would die, they would be laid out on these benches. And then after a year, when the body had decomposed, they would come back and collect the bones into the receptacle underneath the patriarch at the end. So the family would be literally gathered in together. And all these times when in the Bible it says, and such died and was gathered in to his fathers or to his ancestors, it's a metaphorical phrase, but it's also a literal phrase. It's also describing a physical reality. And often when we read the Bible, we lose track of the literal side of what was happening. In Jewish tradition, we interpret the Bible as having various layers of truth that are all true, but I think often through our exile, since we've been so disconnected from the physical places and times and apparatus of the days of our patriarchs and matriarchs, we focus more on the metaphor, and we sometimes forget entirely the literal, or what we would call the pshat meaning of a phrase, which to me only makes that metaphorical meaning richer when you understand it. So he asks to buy the cave because he wants the bones of his future relatives to also be brought in together in the same place together. He doesn't want to just use one of the benches in someone else's tomb and have Sarah's bones thrown in with someone else's family. So he asks to buy it. And the Hittites, going back to the verses, verse 5, and the Hittites replied to Abraham, saying to him, Hear us, my lord. You are the elect of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places. None of us will withhold his burial place from you for burying your dead. So sort of a key Middle Eastern negotiating tactic here. You say no by saying yes. They say, sure, go ahead and bury your dead in any of our places, which is almost as explicit as you could get of a rejection of his request to buy a permanent burial plot for his family. Instead, they say, go ahead and use ours. Thereupon, Abraham bowed low to the people of the land, the Hittites, and he said to them, If it is your wish that I remove my dead, that is, that I take the dead out from my tent for burial, you must agree to intercede for me with Ephron, son of Tzohar. Let him sell me the cave of Machpelah that he owns, which is at the edge of his land. Let him sell it to me at the full price for a burial site in your midst. He wants to buy it. Not only does he want to buy it, he wants to pay full retail price. He doesn't want there to be any doubt later on that a kinyan, an act of purchase, has taken place. And the easiest way to make sure everyone knows that that has happened is by having money change hands. And not just money, but the full price of the place. Ephron was present among the Hittites, which is very strange. He was actually sitting there the whole time, and Abraham was talking about him in the third person, as if he wasn't there. So Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites, all who entered the gate of his town, saying, No, my lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead. Again, this is a way of saying no by saying yes. He sounds like he's offering something more. He's offering the land for free, but in reality, he's removing the part of the ceremony that would most clearly transfer ownership from one party to the other. Then Abraham bowed low before the people of the land and spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, saying, If only you would hear me out. Let me pay the price of the land. Accept it from me, that I may bury my dead there. So Abraham says, No, I want to pay you for it. And Ephron replied to Abraham, saying to him, My lord, do hear me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Go and bury your dead. So he sounds as if he's saying, it's just a little piece of land. It's only worth 400 shekels. But 400 shekels is probably a pretty outrageous price to pay for an empty field with a little cave in it. It would be like buying paying $1 million for a apartment in rural Idaho. Abraham accepted Ephron's terms. Abraham paid out to Ephron the money that he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver at the going merchant's rate. So nonetheless, even though it's an outrageous price, he just agrees to pay it. So Ephron's land in Machpelah, near Mamre, the field with its cave and all the trees anywhere within the confines of that field, passed to Abraham as his possession, in the presence of the Hittites, of all who entered the gate of his town. And then Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Thus the field with its cave passed from the Hittites to Abraham as a burial site. Now, there's several reasons why this is a really important piece, but the most important reason why I'm choosing to focus on this set of verses from this week's Parsha is that this is the first purchase of land in the land that is going to belong to Abraham's descendants, to the people of Israel. This is the first physical embodiment, the first fulfillment of the part of God's promise to Abraham that the land that he showed him is going to belong to him and his descendants. He managed to live to be a very old man without God actually fulfilling any of this promise, practically speaking, in terms of the acquisition of the land. And this is the first piece of that acquisition that we see. What's very interesting is there is a midrash that asks, what are the places that are the most obviously belonging to the Jewish people, right? That people can never challenge us. People can never say, you're thieves, you're bandits, you've stolen them. And it lists Hebron, the cave of Machpelah, Shechem, where the tomb of Joseph is, which was also purchased, and the place of the Temple Mount, today where the Al-Aqsa Mosque stands, which was also purchased with money by King David. So I think this is revealing in a number of ways. One being that it shows us that, in the ancient through the medieval world, the exchange of money for a piece of land is seen as the most legitimate way of taking ownership of it, which is unchallengeable, as opposed to even the right of conquest, which was pretty much universally recognized, but could still, in theory, be challenged. And then further, what's fascinating is that these are three of the most hotly contested sites in the country, and the Temple Mount, one of the most hotly contested pieces of real estate in the world, where almost everyone denies the Jewish right to that piece of land, except for folks like me and hopefully many of you listening to this podcast. So the question becomes, were the rabbis who wrote this midrash morons? This thought that this would prove it to the Gentiles that this land belongs to us. Well, obviously not. They knew that pagans and Gentiles and people who don't consider the Hebrew Bible to be revelatory, a revelation from God, are obviously not going to accept our version of history written in some book as a fact that proves things belong to us. This is clearly meant as proof for us to remember where we are from, and to remember and to remind us that we have a right to this land and that we came by it honestly, quite literally, and that we've paid for it. So this Shabbat, tonight, it's Friday morning here in Israel right now, many, many thousands of Jews will be going to Hebron to spend Shabbat there and to be close to Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and Leah, who are all buried there in the same place. And there's another aspect to it, which is interesting, that the cave itself, we also have a tradition that it's also the burial place of Adam and Eve. And some people refer to it as the opening to the Garden of Eden. And I take that metaphorically on two levels. Meaning, I'm not sure whether Adam and Eve are really buried there, but if they are, I don't know what it means to say that it's the opening to the Garden of Eden, other than to say metaphorically that this is the place where we can most directly contact spiritually with the Garden of Eden. And what I mean is this, that Adam and Eve were brought into the world to serve God and for God to be able to bestow his goodness upon them. At least that's what we read in the books of Jewish philosophy and things that have been written over the last couple thousand years. So Adam and Eve, however, they defy God, and thus we are put into a state of disrepair where we are removed from God and far away, and we feel a distance between us. And the project of Abraham, that starts with Abraham, is for the Jewish people to repair that breach. We are the marriage counselors, so to speak, between men and God. And thus this place is a place where many people go to pay homage to our ancestors, the first in these lines of people who have dedicated themselves to repairing the breach between man and God, bringing the lovers back together, so to speak, and bringing the world back to a place of completeness, wholeness, and peace. And may we please complete that mission soon and in our days. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.